Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Welcome to you, our MFAT Manaaki scholars from all around Africa. We're going to begin today with a mihi whakato from Michael Steedman. He's a senior leader inside Ngāti Whātua, Ōrākei. That's the land on which the University of Auckland sits. They are the traditional owners of the land. And he is also the Kairataki and Deputy Pro-Vice-Chancellor Māori at the University of Auckland. So we'll play a video in a moment when Michael will welcome you as visitors, as if you were coming to New Zealand in person to visit us at the University of Auckland. And he will welcome you as visitors to this place on which we stand in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. He'll sing a waiata and he'll offer a karakia, which is like a prayer or a welcome that has a spiritual dimension to it that enables us to settle into our work or mahi that we'll be doing today. And if you want to learn more about Māori culture and the Māori world and how it flows into the work that we do here in Aotearoa in New Zealand, there are a lot of resources that Suzanne has provided for you on the Canvas page that you will, the learning management system that you will have access to very soon. So Suze, if you could play the video from Michael now, that would be great, and then we'll come back and talk further.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ka hakarau I kia mai I rungi te kaupapa tera, he paku whakamārama ai mui I toki kōrero kia tātou. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll speak again shortly in Te Reo Māori, but just to explain, mihi whakatau is a traditional welcome speech, and then I'll explain a few things after I'm complete, and I'll start also with a karakia, which is a ritual that encourages a positive engagement within a particular hui, such as this. So I'll revert now back to Māori language. Kei te mihi kia tātou katoa, ko te kupu, ko te amorangi ki moa, ka tā pai o himuri nā reira kia ino I tātou. A tikina atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero, tikina atu rā te hautapu o ngā riki. Kai whatatia I tāne te wānanga ki runga ki enei ruanuku, kia koe te matapunenga, maiangi te matapu iho kia hakamau ai kia tīna. Haumi e hui e tāki. A he aha te hau, e wawara mai, he tiu he raki. Nāna ia mai te puputara ki he kiota, e tikina atu e au te kōtū ko I te pauwhakairuka tū ki te waitemata I oku wairangitanga. Te hewa mauri ora. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā mātā waka mai ngā kokongo te ao, ko hakarau ika mai ki tēnei huihunga o tātou I rungi te hui topa nei, nau mai, hara mai, whakatau mai. Nau mai te karanga o enei ngā mātanga, he toru atu o lātou ringa kia koutou, I roti te kaupapa, nau mai. Hara mai hoki, I roti te karanga o Waipapa Taumatarau, University of Auckland me ki te whai wā, ki te whakatū tēnei wānanga I a tātou, tēnā koutou katoa. Whakatau hoki, I roti enei kupu a Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, mihi ana, ki ngā tini whakaheke e wainganui a tātou, whakatau mai. Tuatahi, mai wahi ki te atua, ki te tīmatatanga me te whakaotinga o ngā mea katoa. Ko te tuarua, ki ngā tini mate e wainganui a tātou, e wainganui a koutou, aha kua kaihea, aha kua kōwai, aha kua nōhea, e ngā mate katoa, haere atu rā. Rātou kia rātou, ko whitirangi tia, I rungi tērā waka, ki te haere ki te era o ngā whare manohua, haere. A tātou ki a tātou, e noho mai nei ki te ao tūroa, ki tēnei ao mārama, tēnā koutou katoa. Nōku te honere, ki te tuku enei kupun, mai I tōku tupuna, mai oku hoa mahi hoki I roti I tēnei tari I te rānei. I roto I ngā kupu, hea te mea nui o te ao, he tangata I roti tērā. Hari me te koa ki te kiti a koutou, ko piri mai nei Ruti tēnei, kana whetera, ka huri au ki te rao ngā reo, ka mara mai tātou katoa. Good afternoon again, everyone. Just to reiterate my words of welcome, and amongst all of those words that I just spoke, it's important that I explain part of it, so you understand the acknowledgements that I was making. The first part was a prophecy that talked about the arrival of special things upon the north wind into Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, by my tribe in the early 1800s. And so we apply that to every formal situation, so that we acknowledge you as taonga, as special items, things that are precious to us, and your families as well. The second part in particular that I want to make mention of is we acknowledge in our formal speeches those that have passed on, those that have left us and now sit with the atua, with the gods of our understanding, and we acknowledge you as reflections of all of those that came before you as well. We call it whakapapa, our genealogies, and when we speak and when we meet, we acknowledge our whakapapa to at some point where we might connect on the same level. So we acknowledge the memories of those that we carry with us, especially at this time we were not able to be as close as we normally would be with our friends, families and colleagues. And just lastly, on behalf of the university, Waipapa Taumata Rau, on behalf of the organisers here, a special welcome to make do with the opportunity we don't have of being together, of sharing kai, sharing food and conversation, but being thankful also for the opportunity still to meet. And lastly, from my tribe, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, that is intimately connected with where the University of Auckland sits in the centre of Auckland City, I offer you the words of my ancestors within this greeting too. So kana whetena, kia pai te haere o tō koutou hui. I hope the hui goes well. I'm going to close off with a waiata or a song, because it's custom in these parts that when you speak, you close with a song. So if any of you are speaking later on, feel free to close with a song as well. So we get that opportunity of sharing each of our cultures. So kei te mihi kia koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Papa ki mai, ngā ngaru nunui, wāwaratia, ngā tairere, e ripo e, ngā ngaru nunui, te tai, hei ko nei rā. A tēnā tātou katoa. I'll now hand back to Jennifer.
Kia ora. Thank you, Michael. Ke te mihi nui ki a koe, Michael, for the mihi whakatau. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to do some more introductions. And when we're done, the team that's looking after you over the coming weeks, we'll ask you to briefly introduce yourselves, who you are, where you're from, and what work, what your professional role is, and yeah, and then we'll get to know more about you as the course progresses. So tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, nau mai, haere mai ki te whare, Māria, Tautari, kaupapa. Mōria mai o koutou ngā kou, o koutou hangingaro, o koutou wairua. Nō reira, nau mai, haere mai koutou. Kei te waikato I whakatapua, no kirikiri roa aho. Ko Jennifer Curtin toko ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. So what I'm saying there in my very basic te reo Māori is welcome to you all to the Public Policy Institute. We welcome your contributions from your hearts, from your minds, and from your spirits. And I introduce myself, that my name is Jennifer, that I come from the Waikato region. I was born and raised in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, which is a provincial city about an hour and a half south of Auckland. It's an area, the Waikato region is an area known for being home to the numerous tribes descended from the people of the Tainui canoe, or Waka, and for its anti-conscription position during times of war, and for its strong women leaders. In Māori and Te Ao Māori, it's common for our Indigenous peoples to talk about their whakapapa, their ancestry, to bring different groups of people together and to help identify connections between us all. So in terms of my ancestry, on my mother's side, I'm Australian. My mother was born in Melbourne of Australian parents whose forebears came from Germany and England. And on my father's side, I'm Irish. And my paternal grandmother's family arrived in Dunedin in the South Island of New Zealand in the 1860s. I have 2 adult sons, both of whom were born in Australia while I was living there, one in Canberra and one in Melbourne. And through my partner, my husband, we are connected to families or whānau, both Pākehā and Māori in Rotorua. On a professional level, I'm a professor of politics and public policy here at the University of Auckland, and I'm the founding director of the Public Policy Institute, which is the coordinating engine, if you like, for this course that you're participating in over the next 10 sessions. So 5 weeks together we have. I have a very tiny connection to Africa. I visited Kenya as a backpacker in 1986, so I'm giving away my age now. And I spent a month there. I went to Nairobi, Malindi, Lamu. I visited Masai Mara and Lake Nakuru, and I got to take the then slow train to Mombasa, which was a real highlight. It was on that trip that I first tasted barbecue goat. And 10 years later, when I finished my studies, I took a trip with my parents-in-law to South Africa and again visited cities, towns, wildlife parks, and took the train from Cape Town to Johannesburg. I also went to a rugby game when the New Zealand Wellington team played the then Transvaal team. And I suppose what these experiences tell me is that Africa is a very diverse and vast continent, and I've only had the privilege to be able to visit 2 tiny parts of it. However, it's not uncommon for our students to come from different parts of Africa to study with us here in Auckland. For example, I've had PhD and master's students that have come from Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana. So I really want to welcome you to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And even though, as Michael said, you're joining us remotely, we're really looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you as well as vice versa. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleagues from the PPI who are going to be working with you alongside all of us on this journey. So first up, you will have already met Dr. Suzanne Woodward, who's our program coordinator, the font of all wisdom when it comes to the sessions in this program. Suze, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Kia ora anō, hello again. It's lovely to see you again. I did get to meet some of you, most of you, at the orientation last week. So, ko Suzanne Woodward, toko ingoa. My name is Suzanne. You have received, hopefully, some emails from me. And yes, as Jen said, if there's anything that you have questions about, please feel free to get in touch with me around anything to do with the course. Yes, I'm based here in Auckland. My father is from the Waikato, not far from where Jen's family come from. My mother is from Auckland, but I was born in Johannesburg. So I have a very strong connection to Africa. So, Sanibona, Mulolo, thank you. I'm looking forward to getting to know you all. Kia ora, Jen.
Kia ora, Suze. Next up, another key contact for you is Antonia. She's your advisor and mentor, and you should feel free to touch base with her with questions or issues, and she'll run scheduled drop-in sessions online for you. So Antonia.
Here, everyone. Like Jennifer has rightly introduced, my name is Antonia. I'm your scholar advisor. What that means is that I'll run drop-in sessions every week, Mondays and Tuesdays. New Zealand time, it will be 6 p.m. It's just for an hour, but if that time doesn't suit you for some reason and you want us to like reschedule time, we could do that for your convenience. But when you come, what we should be talking about are issues that you're struggling with, maybe your connection issues, you need some devices, any non-course content related issues, or even talks about Aotearoa, you want to understand more about New Zealand and whatnot. Feel free to jump in and have a session with me. And by the way, I'm from Nigeria, so if there is any Nigerian here, Ekaro, if you're Yoruba. Kiora.
Thank you, Antonia. And later in this course, which is on trade policy, and our resident trade policy expert will introduce himself in a moment, but I wanted to also let you know that Dr. Kemi Igiabor, who's also from Nigeria, she and I will be joining you later in the course to share some insights on gender inclusive trade. So, and Kemi apologizes that she's unable to be with us this week, but you will meet her in the coming weeks. But for now, the person who's most important to this course is Associate Professor Rob Scollay. So Rob, would you like to introduce yourself to the team, please?
Kia ora, Jen. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be meeting with you today. I'm very excited to be going to be working with you for the next 3 to 4 weeks on this very interesting course. My name is Robert Scollay, as Jen mentioned, and I worked for many years at the University of Auckland in the economics department, and my specialist field of interest is in fact trade and trade policy. So I'm very delighted to be able to share this theme with you. Just a little bit about my background. I was born in New Zealand, so I'm a New Zealander, but my parents weren't born in New Zealand. My mother was actually born in Madagascar, which is not quite Africa, but just off the coast of Africa. And my father was born in the Shetland Islands to the north of Scotland. So there's quite a theme of island countries in my background. And but I've been living in New Zealand pretty much all my life. And I have a beautiful wife and 4 lovely daughters. And at the moment, I'm visiting one of my daughters and my only granddaughter in the UK. So I'm speaking to you actually from London. And in fact, just the other day, I had the privilege of going to the Tate Modern Art Gallery, where they have a wonderful exhibition of African photography. And that was a very, very interesting introduction to African culture and the way it has been affected by contact with the outside world. So that was really quite a very educational experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, so I think that's probably enough for me for the time being. I'll hand you back now to Suzanne.
I'll just jump in here and say, because I'm in France, so both Rob and I are a long way away from you. I had the absolute luxury of watching South Africa play France in the rugby on the weekend. And so obviously South Africa did very well in that competition. But you'll have alongside Rob a great lineup of visiting lecturers that will support Rob on various topics over the coming weeks. And because we want to get to know you as well, we'll hear from each of you now, but we also really we give you lots of opportunities to work with your peers in breakout rooms over the course of the coming weeks. So do please feel encouraged and to participate and share your knowledge and experience with us and with your colleagues in this class. So I am going to hand to Suze now, who's going to direct the process of introduction. So she'll call a name as she sees it on her screen, I think is how it works. Is that right, Sue? So you all have to be listening carefully.
Yes, I'll
Thank
go around in the order that you have appeared on my screen. So first up, Tesha.
Okay, yes, it's a very good morning to everyone. Kia ora. Now I'm New Zealand. So, okay, fine. It's a very pleasure to be with you for this part of the team of the Learning Training. My name is Revocatus Tesha from the United Republic of Tanzania, East Africa. Of course, Yana said you have been in Kenya, moved to Mombasa, Malindi, and the like. So perhaps while in Kenya, we saw the topest mountain in Africa. So it's where I originate. And so we are bordered by Kenya. And here now, I'm talking from Dodoma, the central part of the country and the designated capital of the country. Therefore, of course, here I'm doing procurement and supply from the Vice President Office of the United States of Tanzania. So I'm working with the government here in Dodoma. That's great for me. Of course, we will be interacting while conducting training as we get much know about me, and I will get as well from you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Kia ora, Tesha. Thank you. Christian.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Hello.
We can still hear you, Christian. We just can't see you.
Okay.
There
Okay,
you
sorry,
are.
I was interrupted.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Kia ora ano. My name is Christian Etmak. My little about my background. My father and my mother was born in Kilimanjaro region, where the mountain Kilimanjaro is located, the highest mountain in Africa. Yes, and about my family info, I married a beautiful wife named Catherine. I'm blessed with 3 children. My first children is known Adeline, and the second one is called Blaise, and the last one is called Eliasante. And another, from my professional level, I'm procurement officer at the Vice President Office of Tanzania, based at Dodoma, Dodoma City. Yes, and I've been living at Dar es Salaam previously before the capital of Tanzania been moved to Dodoma. So I've been at Dar es Salaam where I've been born. I've been studying there from primary to university. Then I was be able to get a job at National Food Reserve Agency, NFRA in abbreviation. So I've been there for quite a little of time, get a opportunity to act as a manager zone at Dar es Salaam. After then, I've been moved to Shinyanga region near Lake Victoria. I've been staying there for almost 2 years and then get an opportunity to join with the Office of Vice President, where I'm currently working at. This is my little about me. Thank you.
Kia ora, Christian. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Kumbukani.
Morning, everyone. Yes, so my name is Kumbukani Mutali. Greetings from the warm heart of Africa. That's Malawi. And yeah, I'm based in the capital, Lilongwe, and I'm married. I have 3 beautiful daughters. The first is 10, the second is 6, and the last is a year and actually 11 months. So she'll be 2 years old come next month on the 14th. So my professional background, I currently work with an international NGO known as the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership. I'm a programs and business development officer there, so we support smallholder farmers to access inputs at the shortest distance possible. And we also make sure that they have first mile market for their produce. And on that note, we work with off-takers. So we support them with trade agreements, we support them with export permits and whatnot. And actually, that's the reason why I got motivated to be part of this trade policy short training course, so that I can get more knowledge and skills so I can support the off-takers and the partners we work with better. But before in African Fertilizer Business Partnership, I've worked with quite a number of NGOs and companies as well, both in the NGO sector, but also private sector. So I've worked with Farmers World Group of Companies, Meridian. I've also worked with the Catholic Development Commission in Malawi. I've also worked with Aquista Irrigation, is a Netherlands company. And I've also worked with Yamba Malawi, which is basically a child-focused organization supporting households that have under 5 children to get out of poverty. So I look forward to more learning, more networking, and yeah, I think that's enough for now. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Next on my screen is Mindy.
It's good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Jagi. I come from Kenya, from Kiambu County, that is neighboring our capital, Nairobi. And I am not married. Maybe very soon I am going to invite you for my wedding. And on a professional level, I am a dairy technologist, and I work with dairy farmers. We support them in primary milk production. We also support them in also processing of the milk and also marketing of the same. And I work with an organization. It's a private organization by the name Limuru Dairy Farmers Cooperative Society. It's a cooperative society with about 3,000 farmers, both small-scale farmers and also large-scale farmers. We do about 30,000 liters of milk per day, and we support the farmers on that front. Personally, I was impressed by this course, and because we support the farmers in terms of marketing their produce after processing. So in terms of trade policies and also engagement with other stakeholders on the value chain, this course comes in handy in terms of giving services to the farmers. I am very impressed to meet my colleagues from Africa, and also our new colleagues from New Zealand. I really appreciate, and also as I look forward for more networking on the same. Thank you very much for now.
Kia ora, Martin, thank you. Zero.
Are you reading me, please? Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Do you ring me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Suze, I think Gabriel's. Gabriel's sound is
Hello.
on, so could you like mute him and then we can hear Zara? You can't mute him.
No, I can't for some reason.
Oh. Well, okay. I don't know quite what to do then. It's quiet now. Zara, do you want to have another go?
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Oh. I'm having some connection.
Okay, well we can come back to you, Sarah, if that's easier.
Thank you.
Okay, Gabriel.
Okay.
Gabriel sent a chat message saying
Ah,
he can't
right.
hear
I've
anything.
just seen that. Okay, Maxwell. Are you there, Maxwell? Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Can you see me?
We can see you and hear you, Maxwell.
Morning, everyone. I don't know whether it's morning that side. Yeah, it's very early in the morning. Yeah, yes. My name is Maxwell Mampisana. I live here in South Africa. I was born in South Africa. I'm living in a certain city called Bloemfontein. I know many people know Johannesburg and all the stuff, but yeah, I'm in one of the cities called Bloemfontein. I work for the government of South Africa under the Department of Agriculture. I'm an agricultural economist by profession. So what I'm doing here in the department is I'm assisting farmers. I'm assisting to link farmers with the markets. In other words, I'm a marketing officer or an agricultural economist, but under the subdirectory that we call it marketing. So the challenges are very huge, but because mostly we are assisting what we call smallholder farmers, not like we've got different kind of farmers in South Africa. I think we've got commercial and semi-commercial but we've got also have got these smallholder farmers because they are the ones that are struggling to get to markets, and then the issues of exports and imports is still far from them. So I believe that I will learn a lot from this course. Maybe by then I'll be able to have more wider knowledge on how to assist them in reaching these issues of compliance and stuff and so many things that are needed. So I'm looking forward to learn from everyone and to learn whatever it's going to be coming and to record and to make sure that we apply it in my field. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Maxwell. Thank you. Next on my screen is Abdul. Abdul, are you there?
Yes,
Oh.
good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I was facing some challenge for internet connection, but now it's okay. My name is Abdul Chacha. I'm a principal trader officer as well as advisor from the Ministry of Industry and Trade, United Republic of Tanzania. And I didn't catch you well since you started, but I can see that this is an introductory part. In my side is I'm working under the Department of Trade Integrations, Mostly I'm dealing with negotiations. This is a regional negotiations and multilateral and bilateral negotiations. And we have a lot of things which I can get from this one. Some of them, if you look on the digital economy and the whole issue which was trying to be covered on this policy, because we are trying to link what is happened to the regional agreement with the domestic arrangement. And now Tanzania, you know, that is a member of African Continental Free Trade Areas. We need to trade much on that area because that is a very big area for trading, which is about 54 countries. And we still trying to save the outside of the continent as well. And of course, through this meeting, it will add up a lot of experience, knowledge, and which had been brought from you and the other developing countries, which I think that is a very good experience to share with my people in the country. And also have been being channeled to assist the Department of Small and Medium Enterprises currently, but I know this is a very big challenge in that area because they are contributing more than 80% of economic activity in the country. And we need to make sure that we boost all these areas. And because if they don't know what is happening to the regional and the multilateral arrangement or trading system, they can suffer because they need to prepare now to see how they can get compliance with all those arrangements and access all those markets. And actually, we are trying to build the capacity of these people and to sharing what we have been agreed on the regional integrations and to support on building some capacity building and supporting in different level so that they can use effectively what they have. Because we normally in Tanzania, the whole time we have much raw material, but now we need to go for the agro processing. That is a value addition to sell either a semi-processing or final processing product outside of the country, because we can add up a number of employment in the country, which is piling up. And of course, I know that through this program, I will learn a lot from you, and also we can share an experience because we have some of the policy which is underway, is going to be reviewed, and we are because it was it was outdated, and a lot of number of issues have been developed since we have been established this one. So we know that through this knowledge and experience and the knowledge sharing, I'll try to transfer this experience to my colleagues so that they have also to know what is other areas they are doing. The previous speaker is from the SADC, but where we are also, we belong to SADC, SADC regional integrations. We are also a member there. And also we are a member of EAC community, East African community. Also we are member, we are going to establish this tripartite, which will combine EAC, SADC, and the COMESA as well. And then now at that platform, we are going for the CFTA, Continental Free Trade Areas, where the discussion, most of the discussion negotiations is based on the regional aspirations or focus. So, or regional blocks. So that is what actually we're expecting from you, madam. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Abdul. Thank you very much. That was very, very detailed. Next on my screen is Mohammed.
Okay. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good
And
morning.
good evening to those who are in New Zealand. Okay, my name is Mohammed Mkitu. I'm a senior servant working with the government of United Republic of Tanzania at the Department of President Office, Regional Administrations and Local Government Authority, designated in Iringa at Iringa District Council. Professionally as a trade officer, I'm a senior trade officer in Iringa District Council, basing in investment facilitations. I am married with my beautiful wife, Harima. We are blessed with 4 kids. I'm very honored to be among of the participants of this course as per my professional. As per my professional, all of us, believing that we will add some inputs towards our career. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. Kia ora. Next on my screen is Refilwe.
Hello, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yes, my name is Refilwe from Lesotho. Lesotho is a very small country with a population of 2.2 million people. And we are totally and completely surrounded by South Africa, in the southern region of Africa. I am a youth development officer and a youth worker, and in the government institution. And my role is to advise and coordinate young people in all their activities, including income generating activities. And we are guided by Lesotho's national youth policy and other national development strategic plans. So I am very grateful to be in this course. Thank you.
Kia ora, Refilwe. Thank you. Next on my screen is Melvin.
Good morning. Can you hear
Good
me?
morning.
Good morning. My name is Munyama Melvin from Kenya. I'm a senior trade development officer under the State Department for Trade. It's in the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry. For New Zealand, I support New Zealand in rugby when Kenya is not playing the competition. And congratulations for your semi-final sport against Argentina. Yes. I come from the western part of Kenya and I'm currently in the Nairobi city where I work. And I'm currently under the desk of the African Continental Free Trade Area, where we are finishing the negotiation for the remaining pending protocols and the annexes for the protocols. For this course, I've seen the course content and I'm very much awaiting to deepen my skills in the trade policy area, and being I want to be a specialist in the trading services. I've seen you're covering that area in trade in services, and I'm looking forward for the next 1 month. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora, Melvin. Silvano.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Those in New Zealand, good evening. My name is Silvano Gilo. I am a Kenyan. Right now I'm in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. I'm a senior trade development officer under the State Department for Trade in Kenya. I'm glad to be here, and I really appreciate this opportunity given to us to know more about trade policy, as we normally do trade negotiations between Kenya and other countries, that is bilaterally. And also we do resolve trade disputes on the same between all borders, and some bit of establishment of policies in our ministry. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm hoping to deepen my knowledge and skills on trade policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Silvano. Lucky.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, greetings. I'm Lucky Jana, currently from Malawi. I'm based in Lilongwe, the capital city of Malawi, but I'm from Salima, which is the election district that is in the central region of Malawi. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Caroline, and we have a girl who is 3 years now. I'm currently working for Malawi Limited, which is a seed company in Malawi, mainly working as a marketing and a extension officer. So I'm very glad and very happy to be part of this online trade policy course. And I'm looking forward to the knowledge that I'll be able to get after doing the course. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Lucky. Thank you. I'm not sure if I don't know that this is your name, but your Zoom name is Dami.
Okay, thank you. I'm still Dami Woodward. My name is Gamnola Izike. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm from the western part of Nigeria. I live in Oshogbo, where I was also born, where I also grew up. But I love traveling, and I'm an aquaculture earth expert, because I'm focusing on earth technologies. So I was working with Olam, that's Crown Flower Mill, before, but I started up as a senior technologist with a new startup, OK Fish, and we are into transferring technology from Southeast Asia to Africa, Nigeria precise. So, and like I said, I love traveling, and currently I'm in Vietnam on a project. Yeah, I'm currently in Vietnam on a project, and I applied for this course because I want to have in-depth knowledge on trade policy, on what are the policy that are available to transfer, maybe for importation or exportation of materials to our country and outside our country. So I'm looking forward to really learn a lot in this course, and to be able to implement and use it in my place of work. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you very much. Who's next? Because thank you to all the people who've been introducing themselves in the chat. Tashale? Okay. You there, Tishale? No, you're unmuted, but we still can't hear you. Can see you. Maybe give you a minute to see if you can make it work. Bethel, do you want to introduce yourself in the meantime?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Bethel Chademana. I come from Zimbabwe. I'm a food technologist by profession. I'm currently studying for my master's in food security and sustainable agriculture. I also work in a dairy processing industry here in Zimbabwe as a production supervisor. I'm interested in knowing about trade policies here in Africa, because trade affects the country's GDP, which then affects the country's food security. So I'm happy to meet you all, and thank you everyone for offering this course.
Thank you, Bethel.
You're welcome.
Lovely to have you here. I'm trying to keep track now of who I haven't had. Suse? Oh, you're on mute.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Isaiah Yaleo. I'm from Ethiopia. I'm working Minister of Trade and Regional Integration. I'm working senior bilateral and regional trade expert. I look for from this course regarding trade policy, trade negotiation, and trade disputes. I look forward. I look a lot of experience getting from this training. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora. Soila? Tishale, do you want to give it another go? Still can't hear you, unfortunately. No. Solomon?
Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Solomon Ado from Ghana. I work at Sudan Technical University as a agri production manager. I'm interested in trade policy, and I look forward to have more experience in trade policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that is everybody. Tishala, thank you. So Zara, Gabriel, Tishala, all of you who introduced yourselves in the chat, thank you. Now it's been very lovely getting to you and hear. Oh, so Soila? Soila, are you there? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning from rather cold and rainy morning in Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Soila Kasaine. I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, State Department for Foreign Affairs. I have been a civil servant for 18 years. I'm happy to be here and excited to learn from each and every one of you. This course is in line with what we do every day at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'm excited to hear experiences and share experiences with each and every one of you. Lovely to meet everyone across Africa and of course our friends from New Zealand, far away. We were supporting New Zealand in the rugby. So thank you. Probably missed you out with internet connection earlier on, but I can now hear you clearly. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Well, good. It's lovely to meet you all too. And yes, All Blacks. Gabriel, you've got your hand up. Yeah, I think Gabriel's struggling a little bit with his connection. So Gabriel, if you had anything you wanted to ask, then by all means, please put it in the chat. But now I think that's everyone now. I don't think I've missed anyone. I hope I haven't. Please tell me if I have. Okay. Well, Rob, it's your time to shine. So I will now hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we can get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you to all of you for introducing yourselves. It's really interesting for me to know your background and some of the things that you are doing in your work. I will try to make as much as possible of what I say to be relevant to what you're interested in, but also I'll be providing you with some wider background to trade policy in the wider world and in some of the developments that are taking place in the world as a whole, which of course as relatively small countries, New Zealand and many countries in Africa, we have to navigate our way through very turbulent waters in the international economy, and we need to understand what some of the threats and some of the opportunities that come from that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now and start my presentation, and hope this will work very smoothly. Yes, I will just get this set up properly. If you don't, just give me a few minutes to a few seconds to do that. I can, here we go, set up a slideshow. And from the beginning, Okay, excuse me. This is a little bit different from what I'm used to, so just give me a
You,
minute
you
to.
just close that window, Rob, the setup show, just close that.
Yeah,
And then
sure.
just go from beginning.
Yep, I just need to make it into the slideshow though. That's
Yeah, well, if you click from beginning, that it will do that.
we'll do it. Okay, sorry. Right. Oh, good. Okay, that was just a little bit different from what I have had before. So I'm going to
Loving
just...
your new laptop, I'm sure.
Okay, so this is session 1, and you can see that the topics I'm going to cover are very much looking at the wider panorama of trade policy in the world as a whole. As I just said, it's the global environment that our countries have to navigate our way through. And as you'll also see, we start off with saying that global trade policy is at a crossroads, and then we go back and trace how we got to that point, look at how the global institutions in world trade developed, how they went through a very successful period in years gone by, and why things have become much more difficult globally in world trade probably in the last 10 years. This is really the environment that we will, as smaller countries, have to deal with. But before I do that, I want to just start with something very positive, which is not exactly to do with trade, but it is very much to do with Africa. And this is a map of the world, as you can see, and it's essentially illustrating the forecasts by the International Monetary Fund, which came out actually this month, this forecast, of the expected growth rates, economic growth rates of countries around the world. And the way this diagram works is that the countries that are shaded in green have all got positive growth rates. The darker the green, the higher the forecast growth rate. So the darkest green are countries that are expected to have economic growth of 6% or more in the current year. The medium shaded green, countries that are expected to have growth rates of between 3 and 6%, with 3% being the expected world average. And then the light green is countries that have positive growth, but somewhere between 0 and 3%. And then we move across to the countries shaded orange, which have negative growth rate, and red, even more negative growth rate. And what you can see there when you look at Africa is that Africa has the biggest proportion of dark green shaded countries of anywhere in the world. A number of countries are in the very high growth rates. Many more are in that 3 to 6% forecast growth rate. And almost all of the countries in Africa, unlike some other parts of the world, are expected to have positive growth, even if some of them are in the lower light shaded green, being of 0 to 3%. But the outlook for growth in Africa is clearly, you can see visually, it's clearly more positive than any other region in the world. So Africa is potentially going to be one of the most dynamic parts of the world economy in the year to come, and therefore should be in a very good position to take advantage of the benefits of international trade, but also, of course, will need to navigate its way through, just as my country and many other countries have to do, navigate its way through some very turbulent waters in international trade. You can, of course, see that there is one country in Africa shaded in red that has forecast very low negative economic growth. That's, of course, Sudan. And I think we can all understand why that might be the case in Sudan, given what has been happening in that country very recently. Okay, so I'm going to now move on and talk about, it's good to have that positive picture, because when we move across and talk about what is happening in the global world of trade policy, we find that the picture is not particularly positive right now. I've headed up this slide as global trade policy at a crossroads. And I found just recently, a couple of weeks ago, a very useful article in The Economist magazine, which described what we are seeing, mainly in the larger developed countries, who have an outsized influence on world trade, and in particular one of the biggest developed countries, where governments have turned away from the established wisdom about trade policy. And we see, as The Economist described it, the rise of what they call homeland economics. This is a protectionist, high subsidy, intervention-heavy set of policies that are being introduced, particularly in developed countries, particularly in one in particular. And they're doing this because they are heavily involved in international supply chains. They've found that they have proved to be very fragile in the recent turbulence in the world economy. They see themselves see their national security being threatened. They see that the cost of living crisis and the response of governments in many parts of the developed world has been to turn away from the established wisdom of trade policy towards these much more protectionist, high subsidy, intervention-heavy policies, which is really bad news for many of our countries, our smaller countries in the world economy, because what these major developed countries do in international trade obviously creates problems for the rest of us. So we have to understand why they're doing this. We have to understand what's happening, and all our countries will have to live in this world that's being created for us. And The Economist finished its discussion by saying, today, if you argue for free trade in Washington, you will be scoffed at as hopelessly naive. In other words, there's no longer any real belief in the idea of trade and free trade in Washington, D.C., and that's reflected in the policies that are being rolled out in that country and in a number of other, mainly developed countries. The good news is that the support for open trade policy remains strong in other countries, including smaller developing and developed countries, but also, very notably, from the BRICS, the major developed countries who held their annual summit in Johannesburg quite recently. The BRICS, of course, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the five giant developing countries. And at their latest summit, they agreed to expand their membership to include a further 5 member countries of the BRICS. And in that statement, the declaration, they had a section on trade. And I think it's worth reading this out because it is a kind of breath of fresh air, if you like, in the world that we have today. They said, we reaffirm our support for the open, transparent, fair, predictable, inclusive, equitable, non-discriminatory and rules-based multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization, or WTO, at its core, with special and differential treatment for developing countries, including the least developed countries. And that is exactly the kind of statement that we as trade economists and trade specialists would like to hear coming from governments in the world today. And it's really encouraging that we have seen this statement coming forward from the BRICS summit, although we would have to note that one of the BRICS members, of course, is Russia, which has been responsible for some of the disruption in the world today because of its war in Ukraine. But nevertheless, the fact that the BRICS have made this statement in favor of what is the established international trade order and determined to support that, that's a kind of positive counterweight to what we are seeing from some of the other major economies in the world today. Having said that, we have this rather messy situation in the world of trade policy today, perhaps the first thing to do is to talk about how we got to this point. And we can start that story by looking at how things went much better in the second half of the last century, the 20th century, sometimes looked on by trade specialists today as a kind of golden age, when things went really well, when there was a dramatic expansion of trade, and that was associated with what was really unprecedented global prosperity. In that second half of the century, the annual real per capita income growth in the world averaged 2% per year, which is over double the average per capita income growth in the 130 or so years before that, and certainly higher than what we see today. And at the same time, the ratio of world exports to world GDP increased more than 3 times, more than tripled, from 5.5% in 1930 to 17.2% in 1998. And I provided the internet link to these figures that you can look at yourself if you want. So this was a period in which the world was unusually prosperous. It was also a period in which trade was unusually vibrant. Very, very positive picture in terms of world growth and world trade. And at the same time, at the end of this period, at the end of the century, of course, China opened itself to the outside world and became a member of the WTO. And that helped to extend these very positive trends into the early years of the 21st century, even though China's emergence in the world economy also, of course, intensified the competition facing industries in some other countries. But in general, through this period, we had trade becoming more and more open, both at the multilateral level, the regional or plurilateral level, and also at the unilateral level. In trade policy, we talk about these 3 levels. Multilateral means the global dimension of trade, involving all countries, and the institution, of course, that is responsible for guiding multilateral trade is the World Trade Organization today. But we also have important developments, and many of you refer to these, at the regional level, plurilateral, or we have to say preferential trade agreements, such as some of the agreements in Africa and other parts of the world, agreements in Africa that some of you mentioned, and also some mega agreements in different parts of the world. And you mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is one of these mega agreements that are being promoted today, which we will talk about in some detail later in the course. And then, of course, the very important 3rd level of trade policy is the unilateral level, which is individual governments forming their policy on their own, which they will normally do, of course, in recognition of what is going on in the outside world. But each government has its own discretion to some extent to operate its own trade policy within the rules that are set up at the multilateral level and within the obligations and commitments they will have made to at the regional or plurilateral level through various trade agreements. So, and that kind of, all those 3 levels in the second half of the 20th century were working to produce a very positive development in world trade, which unfortunately contrasts rather dramatically with what we see today. So we'll go back to just talk about how trade was organized in that very positive period that some economists call the golden age of international trade and international economic development. The institutions that were set up at the beginning of that period, what we call sometimes the Bretton Woods institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which were followed by the creation of the multilateral trading system, which was based originally on the GATT, founded around about the same time as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and then succeeded by the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which was established in 1974. And I think given what is happening in the world today with so many wars breaking out around the world, it's perhaps useful to remember that these institutions were set up specifically as a reaction to the disaster of the Second World War and the perceived economic causes of it. In other words, looking back on the terrible experience of the Second World War and looking back to what caused the war and many of the economic causes of the war, the general sense of leaders at that time was, we must never do this again. We must avoid the kind of economic situation that gave rise to this terrible war. And the setting up of these institutions was motivated really by this determination to avoid getting into the situation where war would ever break out again. And of course, today we are now seeing for the first time, well, we're not seeing war, unfortunately, for the first time, but we are seeing outbreaks of significant wars around the world now, for really perhaps the first time for many, many years, although we have had occasionally other wars like the Vietnam War and so on in the past. So the setting up of this multilateral trading system resulted and was set up specifically to bring about the gradual reduction of worldwide trade barriers. We are not talking about free trade, of removing of all trade barriers, because that's never been a realistic objective to get rid of every trade barrier in the world, but certainly the structure and the procedures of the World Trade Organization and before it the GATT were designed to gradually, through agreements among the members, to reduce the worldwide barriers to trade. It has to be said that this operated mainly for industrial products, especially in the early days, and industrial products except for textiles and clothing, which of course were the industrial products of greatest interest to developing countries in those days. And agriculture has always been a more difficult sector to in which to reduce trade barriers. That's very much something that we in New Zealand are very conscious of as an agricultural exporting country, and many of your countries also will have the same kind of experience of the difficulties of breaking down trade barriers in agricultural trade. Progress is made in that area, but it has always been more difficult than making progress on reducing trade barriers for industrial products. And the way in which these trade barriers came down were through the negotiation, through successive rounds of negotiations, which are called negotiating rounds, to reach agreements among the members of the GATT and then the WTO on legally binding commitments to limit the extent of their tariffs, the height of their tariffs and the extent of their quotas, and to commit themselves to abide by an agreed set of trade rules. So this is the basic feature of the GATT WTO system. It's the legally binding commitments of members to have limits on their tariffs and the extent of their quotas, and to agree to follow an agreed set of trade rules. There was attention being paid in the GATT and later in the WTO to the trade needs of developing countries, led to the introduction of special and differential treatment, or sometimes called S&D treatment, of developing countries in the WTO, which meant that the rules and the commitments were not required to apply to the same extent to developing countries, to give them policy space to pursue their development objectives. There were also proposals that emerged for commodity cartels, get groups of commodity producing countries to get together to try to boost the prices at which they sold their export commodities. Most of these turned out to be unsuccessful, but one of the very successful commodity cartels, of course, was OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which, as we now have some of the richest countries in the world, in the Middle East in particular, but in some other oil-producing countries as well, are members of OPEC. That is the one really successful commodity cartel that has endured up to the present day. And so one of the essential features of this system of trade, system of trade regulation, was that it was a rules-based system. First and foremost, it was designed to gradually reduce trade barriers, but also it set up a system of rules by which international trade would be conducted. And for smaller countries like New Zealand, my country, but also I'm sure for many of your countries, the importance of having an agreed set of rules is that this provided security for smaller countries, that they would not be pushed around all the time by bigger, more powerful countries, that the kind of environment in which they would carry out their trade would be predictable as well as secure. So the idea of a rules-based system of international trade has always been very important for a country like New Zealand, and I'm sure that's also the case for many of your countries as well. And another important feature of this system is that over time, the membership of this system, membership of the World Trade Organization expanded to include the majority of the world's countries. Almost the whole world belongs to the WTO. And you can see here this map of the members of the WTO, all the green, all the countries shaded in green are members of the WTO. You can see a small number of countries that are described as observers negotiating accession. These are countries that have applied to join the WTO and are still in the process of negotiating the terms of their entry, which means that they are now have observer status in the WTO. And you can see in Africa, Libya, Algeria, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan and South Sudan are in that category. In the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, I think that's Tajikistan or Turkmenistan, and then one or two countries in Eastern Europe are in that category. But by far the vast majority of the countries in the world, some 164 countries, are members of the WTO, which means that they have all committed themselves to this system of trade regulation. It's also important, I think, to note that the agreement that constitutes the WTO agreement consists of a large number of subsidiary agreements, which included the original GATT agreement, which was first concluded in 1947 and then updated before the creation of the WTO, and then at the creation of the WTO, there were added to the GATT this whole list of additional agreements on all these different topics: agriculture, services, textiles and clothing, intellectual property, trade-related investment measures, anti-dumping, subsidies and countervailing measures, safeguards, technical barriers to trade, which means product standards, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which means biosecurity, quarantine, government procurement and dispute settlement. A very important agreement on dispute settlement, where the providing that where countries broke the rules, action could be taken against that by countries that were being disadvantaged by the breaking of the rules, and the dispute could be resolved through a system of dispute settlement that was set up within the WTO and also before that in the GATT. So that's this WTO set of agreements are very comprehensive in the sense that they cover a very, very wide range of trade activities. And as the course goes on, we will look at a number of these, focusing particularly on some of the parts of the agreements that are really important for our countries, things like sanitary and phytosanitary measures for technical barriers to trade for agricultural exporting countries, services, agriculture, and so on. So it's a very comprehensive set of agreements, although, as we'll see, it is not, unfortunately, been able to move with the times. So there are some important aspects of world trade that have emerged since the creation of the World Trade Organization, which are not yet covered by the WTO agreements, and that is one of the problems that we face in the international trading system. There are in these among these different parts of the WTO agreements, there are some flashpoints which have always caused trouble. There are elements of unfinished business, particularly in agriculture. I've said agriculture has always been difficult, and that is because it is politically difficult for some of the major developed countries, such as the United States, the European Union, the European Free Trade Agreement, Japan, Korea, some of the Nordic countries have always considered it to be politically difficult to reduce trade barriers or to eliminate trade barriers in agriculture, and they have been powerful enough within the system to maintain that position, and so that agriculture has generally been a much more highly protected. Sorry? Sorry? Yeah. Can I? Did you want to ask? Did you want to ask a question? Hello? Okay, I'll keep going.
I think it was an accident.
Okay, that's fine. So agriculture has been both a potential flashpoint where disputes often break out, but also an element of unfinished business, as we'll see. Efforts are still being made to complete the liberalisation of agricultural trade to the extent that has been achieved in other parts of world trade through the WTO. So that's both a flashpoint and an element of unfinished business. Another very important element of unfinished business is in the area of services, and we'll talk quite a lot about services, I think, in the next session, if we get time for that, if we get to it in time. Services are a whole range of activities that are not involving the production of goods, things like construction, business services, education, health, tourism. All of these sectors are services sectors, and the service sector as a whole is by far the largest sector in most countries these days. So it's a very important part of our economies. It's crucial for economic efficiency. If we think about transport, financial services, business services, these are sectors that are absolutely critical for the efficiency of our economies, for our competitiveness in world markets, and for our ability as economies to include all of the members of our populations in economic activity. But so you would think that there would be a lot of potential for benefits from increasing trade and services. But unfortunately, and as we'll see reasons for this, and we'll talk about this possibly the next session, or maybe in the session after that, the WTO negotiating process has really produced quite limited progress in bringing down trade barriers to services over many, many years. So that's a really big area of unfinished business in the WTO. Partly, the difficulty has been that, unlike trade in goods, trade policy for services, that we don't have tariffs, for example, in the case of services, and generally reducing trade barriers generally means changing domestic regulations, which are often politically sensitive, and governments all around the world typically find it difficult to commit themselves to the kind of changes in regulations that are necessary to reduce barriers to trade and services. Subsidies and state-owned enterprises, another major flashpoint. There have been huge disputes going on between big countries like the United States and China over subsidies, state-owned enterprises, and their sort of unfairness in international trade, which results from government support for state-owned enterprises. It's a major flashpoint, and one of the issues in the WTO is that the WTO rules on subsidies and state-owned enterprises are clearly inadequate. They're not really fit for purpose. They don't really address some of the critical issues involved in the use of subsidies and the operation of state-owned enterprises. And so that means that the disputes that break out over these issues are very difficult to resolve, because we don't have an adequate system of rules to deal with this part of international trade. Intellectual property and public health, also a very much a flashpoint. Intellectual property means where we have things like patents or trademarks that give protection to businesses or individuals that have created new inventions or created new works of art or visual arts or entertainment services and so on. The issue with intellectual property is that the intellectual property protection through patents or trademarks or other copyright, other forms of protection, they give these producers of intellectual property protection, a monopoly, for a given period of years, which allows them to get the benefit of what they have created. And we as a community do that because we want people to create these whether it be medicines or inventions or entertainment, methods of entertainment, or whatever has been created. We want this to be created. We need to provide the incentive for that to happen. But if we provide too much intellectual property protection, it means that these providers of the property have a monopoly, and they're able to use that monopoly to charge the rest of us very high prices. And in the case of medicines, that has sometimes in the past, or even today, creates a situation where, say, pharmaceutical companies are able, who have produced a new medicine or a new drug, are able to price those products out of the reach of many ordinary people, or even whole countries that are relatively poor, and that has been a big issue in trade policy over the years. And we saw it most recently, of course, with the issue of vaccines for COVID, where again, in fact, the issue was so important that the country members of the WTO came together and agreed to give up intellectual property protection for vaccines, so that vaccines could become, COVID vaccines could become more readily available, and that was helpful in improving the distribution of COVID vaccines around the world, although, of course, problems still remained.
Do you think this might be a good spot for us to have a break, Rob?
Yeah, I just think I'll maybe go through to a couple more slides, and then that would be really good, I think, because we'll move on to a slightly different topic. So I think the other thing that I think we see in the WTO is that because the progress in negotiations has slowed right down, that we are not making the kind of progress in the WTO that we used to be able to achieve because of so many problems in international trade. Countries that have become frustrated, members that have become frustrated in this, have engaged themselves on what we call plurilateral initiatives. These are where a number of members of the WTO who want to make progress on a particular issue where they can't get the agreement of the full membership to work on this issue, they work together in a plurilateral initiative with the idea that if they can reach a conclusion on these issues, maybe they could persuade the rest of the membership of the WTO to take up the conclusions of their work. In other words, to multilateralize the work that they've done. And you can see there's a number of issues where there are plurilateral initiatives going on within the WTO on a number of issues. Some of them are really, really important. For example, fossil fuel subsidy reform is critical in the fight against climate change. Trade and gender, another very important issue. Domestic regulation of services, a very important issue. Electronic commerce, critical for digital trade. So there is a lot of work going on, even though the WTO itself hasn't been able to maintain the pace of rulemaking and setting up new rules and understandings. But the work is still going on, which shows that there are members of the WTO who really want the WTO to succeed, to develop, and to continue to provide the rules that are needed to regulate the sort of newer elements of international trade. And to sort of give you a flavour of what comes out of WTO ministerial meetings these days, even though there is no progress being made on the major rounds of negotiations, such as, of course, we have the Doha round of negotiations, which began in 2003 and which has still not concluded and which may never conclude, but the members still come together to try to make progress, to make decisions on things that they can agree upon. And as an example, at the most recent ministerial meeting in 2022, we had a number of outcomes. These are the kind of things that we still can get progress on in the WTO, even though the sort of full-scale negotiations are not moving forward as the members initially had hoped. So in June 2022, that this ministerial meeting, that was where the waiver of intellectual property protection, the TRIPS waiver for vaccine production for COVID was agreed. It was very controversial, but it was agreed. They made a decision, legally binding decision, not to limit exports to the World Food Programme, which is a kind of a step forward in agricultural trade, a small step, but an important step. They moved forward on an agreement on fishery subsidies, which we'll talk about in a later session of this course. They agreed that they would make concrete steps to facilitate the trade of food and agriculture, including cereals, fertilizers, and other agricultural inputs. In other words, they recognized that agriculture still lags behind other elements of trade in the WTO agreements, and they agreed to take concrete steps to once again try to fix that problem. They agreed on continuing a moratorium on customs duties on electronically managed business transactions or trade transactions, and they committed themselves to work to reform the WTO to improve its functions, including reflecting the interest of developing countries. So this is recognizing that the members recognize that the WTO does have problems. It needs reform in some areas, and there is still a commitment to try to work on this, even though getting agreement on the reforms continues to be very difficult. And they also made commitments to keep discussing to get the dispute settlement system working again in the WTO, which broke down 4 years ago. Very important and very big problem for the WTO that its dispute settlement system hasn't been working. They are committed through this ministerial meeting conclusion to continue working on finding ways to get the dispute settlement system back when working again by 2024, which is, of course, next year. And we'll talk about why that's important and how the system broke down, perhaps after the break. Okay, so let me just stop there. And as Suzanne said, it might be a good time to have a break, and we'll move on to a slightly different aspect of the World Trade System when we come back. So, Suzanne.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. So we'll have a break for 20 minutes and we'll be back. That works out really well. And we'll be back at 12:30, whatever the hour is, wherever you are in Vietnam or London or Tanzania. So we will see you in 20 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to start again. Well, welcome back, everybody. We'll just go on for another half hour or so, and then we'll have our breakout sessions. I've talked about the multilateral level of trade policy, which is essentially the level of trade policy that works at the level of the World Trade Organization or the WTO, and in fact some other international institutions as well, such as the World Customs Organization. What I will move on now is to what the WTO calls the regional level, the regional trade agreements, or economists typically call these agreements preferential trade agreements. These are things like free trade agreements, customs unions, common markets. They're preferential because the members of these agreements are giving preferential treatment to each other. They are reducing their trade barriers against each other, but not doing the same thing with other countries. So there's a kind of preferential trade going on here. But they are called regional trade agreements in the WTO, or RTAs. In economics, we call them PTAs, preferential trade agreements. One of the longest established examples of this, of course, is the European Union, and it's also perhaps interesting, again, to note that one of the motivations for setting up the European Union was the determination of European countries after the Second World War to create conditions under which there would never again be a war in Europe. Of course, the Second World War was devastating for Europe. Before that, they had the even more devastating First World War and a long, long history of wars between countries in Europe. So the European Union, one of its main purposes, main purposes of it being established was to create conditions under which there would no longer be any incentive for countries in Europe to fight wars with each other. which is one of the reasons why the Ukraine war is so disturbing for people in Europe, because it sort of brings war back into the, at least into the margins of Europe. And then around the world, we saw 2 waves of free trade agreements or preferential trade agreements, many of them involving developing countries, including in Africa, a first wave in the 60s and 70s, mainly linked to inward-looking policies where the countries involved in these agreements were setting up trade agreements among themselves to keep out trade with other countries. A second wave from the late 1980s onwards, where the countries were forming free trade agreements as part of their move to engage more with the international economy. And then from the 1990s onwards, we saw preferential trade agreements really take off. You can see that in this diagram. From 1990 onwards, there's a massive increase in the number of trade agreements, especially among developing countries, but also between developed and developing countries. And today we have something like 325 regional trade agreements or preferential trade agreements currently in force. So they're a big part of the global trade scene. And we have as well the perhaps a natural tendency to try to amalgamate or consolidate these agreements into larger, bigger agreements covering a larger number of members. And you've mentioned already the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is perhaps the most recent of these developments, covering hopefully the whole of Africa. And my colleague Catherine Grant, who has a long experience of working in Africa, is going to talk about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, in the 4th session of this course. In my part of the world, in the Asia Pacific, we have big mega agreements called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership involving countries in East Asia, the RCEP. And it's worth saying here also that I did mention that in the case of the WTO, the sort of objective is to reduce trade barriers, but nobody really believes that we're going to get to complete global free trade through the WTO. But in some of these preferential agreements or regional agreements, you do, not in all of them, but in some of them you do get an approximation to free trade, where almost all trade between the members becomes free. So, for example, between Australia and New Zealand, we have almost completely free trade through our trade agreement between the 2 countries. And there are other examples of trade agreements, of regional trade agreements, that have achieved almost completely free trade. Probably some of those are in Africa, but you will know that better than me. So having looked at the multilateral and the plurilateral level, we'll talk about the unilateral level tomorrow when we talk about more in the sort of mechanisms of trade policy in more detail. Here, I just want to move on and talk about some of the important issues that are evolving in world trade or emerging as big or problematic issues. And we'll start with the question of global value chains and production networks. And I think you probably are all familiar with the idea of global value chains or production networks. Began in the 1990s, accelerated in the early years of this century, began as the offshoring of labor-intensive production processes from developed countries to other countries with lower labor costs to reduce the overall cost of production of the finished product by taking advantage of lower labor costs in developing countries, but developed into much more sophisticated patterns of production and trade in Europe and also in East Asia, where you have production divided up into many different parts, maybe 10 or 12 different locations involved in producing a single product. Each part of the production process is located where it's most economic to do so, and in that way you're minimizing the cost of production of the say the smartphone or the TV set or whatever you're actually producing through the global network, or we call it sometimes a production network or a global value chain. So essentially you're slicing the production process into multiple modules and locating different modules in different countries to maximize the cost advantages involved in the production process. And the WTO had a very good phrase to describe this. Instead of trading in goods, once we have production networks, we're actually trading in tasks. Different tasks are being carried out in producing a single good like a motor car or a smartphone or TV set or whatever. Different tasks are allocated to different locations depending on where it's most economic to locate each task. And the trade that takes place is trade in the different parts of the different components of the finished product, which get traded between the different locations until they all come together in a final assembly location, which has traditionally been China, where all the different components come together and are assembled into the finished product and then exported and are shown in trade statistics as the export of that final assembly location, such as China. So this is an example of a diagram illustrating this, where you would have the different production processes before fragmentation into production networks all integrated in a single factory. After fragmentation, they all get divided up and the production processes move through a number of different locations until you get to the finished item. Richard Baldwin had a very nice, economist called Richard Baldwin had a very nice illustration of this, contrasting 20th century trade, where at the upper part of this diagram, where goods are totally produced within a single country in 3 different bays in each country. They are then shipped to the other country as a finished good. Compare this to the case of a production value chain or a production network, where you have, on this very simplified example, the bays are located in different countries, and not just the products are traded between the countries, but the output of each bay may be traded from one country to the other, so that the production can continue in another bay in the other country. So you're getting two-way flows of goods, ideas, technology, capital, and technicians, and you're getting investment and international investment and managerial and market know-how being moved between the two countries concerned. I want to close this down a bit. So we saw this phenomenon of production networks or global value chains expanded to sort of very complex production systems spread across countries. As I've mentioned, a single product might be involve components produced in 12 or even more countries. Various types of product are particularly prone or particularly suitable for this kind of production process, and the development of standard components like long-lasting batteries, which can be used in many different products, also help to facilitate the development of this kind of production system, which became especially complex and sophisticated in East Asia and also in Europe, but also we see it also in the Americas and in other parts of the world as well. So another emerging issue, of course, that's one of the most important developments in international trade, I suppose, that we've seen over the last 30 years is the development of these production networks and global value chains, and I'll come back to some of the issues involved with them in a few minutes. But before that, I'll go on to another emerging and evolving issue, what we call digital trade, which is a very broad concept. It is defined in different ways by different people. Sometimes it can be involving, it can be defined as trade which is involved, which may be transacted digitally, but the goods might be physical goods that are actually produced and delivered physically. In other cases, you might be talking about digital trade where the entire product, for example, a digital service, is the whole transaction and production is conducted digitally. And similarly with the digital economy, again, we have different definitions of a digital economy. Does it just mean the online platforms and activities like Microsoft and Google and so on, and the activities that are based on those platforms? or can you define it as all activities that utilize digitized data? So there are various definitions of digital trade and digital economy, and depending on which definition you use, the size of the global digital economy can be measured as anything from 4% to 15% of global GDP. As I say, the size depends on what definition you're using, but what we do know is that the digital economy and digital trade is growing very much faster than global GDP. And you can see here as an illustration of this, the growth, first of all, in goods exports, the purple line in this diagram, starting in 2005, going through to 2021, digitally delivered services exports, the red line. You can see the two lines are more or less converging up until 2013, and then digital services exports take off and completely dominate the exports of goods in terms of the rate of increase. So this is a kind of an acceleration that's taken place in different forms of digital trade, and one illustration of that. So the number of key issues that come up when you have digital trade. Of course, digital trade is based on data flows, digital data flows across borders. What about the privacy issues associated with that? What about the question of data localization, where governments might insist that the data be kept within their economies on servers in their own economies, which of course slows up the whole process. Questions of cybersecurity, a whole range of issues relating to cross-border data flows. But of course, cross-border data flows are the lifeblood of digital trade. Market power, the huge market power of internet platforms like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on. How should they be regulated to ensure they don't abuse their market power? What regulation can be introduced to regulate the content that they may provide? Things like pornography, hate speech, terrorism, radicalization through digital means. How can this be kind of moderated? Very, very important and difficult issue. And also the question of the moratorium that was agreed and has now been extended on internet transactions, transactions that are arranged through the internet but may involve the delivery of physical goods. And of course, if we're talking about digital trade between countries that operate different digital systems under different forms of regulation, and we have three very important separate, what I call digital kingdoms: the United States, the European Union, and China, who all have different forms of regulation and relating to the various issues in digital trade. How can you get interoperability between the systems of these three digital kingdoms, or between these digital kingdoms and other digital domains that may operate again differently from those? And then moving on from what we now think about as digital trade or digital economy, we can move on to what some people now call the fourth industrial revolution, where we are moving towards moving away. We've been through the first three industrial revolutions, from mechanization to assembly line mass production, computerized and automated production, and then moving to cyber physical systems using the Internet of Things and of course artificial intelligence, which has become sort of front page news in recent years. What does all this mean for trade as well as for jobs, for the economy, and for society? Another key issue involving in trade is the trade policy response to climate change. We know that this is perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, issues facing humanity. It's potentially an existential issue for the survival of the human race. We know that greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced if we're going to survive, and we know what we have to do, some of the key things we have to do to achieve that, to develop low emission technologies and adopt those technologies, to mobilize enough public and private finance to allow this to happen. And many would agree that if we want to achieve these things, if we want to get low emission technologies widely adopted and get investment into those technologies, then the incentive has to be created by making the carbon price of carbon higher dramatically increase the price of carbon, so to incentivize the development of technologies and the financing, the investment in technologies that actually minimize the use of carbon because of the high price of carbon. So that all of those, none of those things actually necessarily trade issues directly, but the question for trade is how can trade policy support these changes, particularly once we have carbon pricing developed in different countries. What does that mean for international trade? We have the example of the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, or CBAM, which is creating quite a lot of discussion, if not controversy. We also have proposals in the area of subsidies in international trade to phase out subsidies on fossil fuels, to reduce the incentive to use fossil fuels by banning subsidies on them as part of trade agreements, and also trade agreements to reduce trade barriers on the trade and environmental goods and services, which would be aimed to reduce the cost of developing and spreading low emission technologies. If the products that are needed for that can be traded at a lower cost through trade agreements, that's going to reduce the cost of developing and adopting low emission technologies. So these are issues where trade policy has a crucial part to play in supporting the developments that are needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I've talked about the question of access to medicines and the relationship to intellectual property protection and the pricing of medicines, essential medicines, and then also the question of COVID-19 distribution issues and the role of intellectual property in either facilitating that or slowing it down. So I won't go into that again. So moving on from these key issues and how the trade system can deal with them, we come up against two of the key challenges that faces the WTO today. The first challenge is the paralysis in the rule-making function, the WTO's function of producing trade rules. We started the Doha round of trade negotiations 22 years ago. The negotiations haven't concluded. They have now effectively been suspended. And the fact that these negotiations haven't been completed means that the WTO has, generally speaking, not been able to update its trade rules to reflect the changing realities in international trade. In other words, all of these emerging or evolving issues that I've just been talking about, they create new issues for international trade, which ideally require new trade rules to address them. The WTO has not been able to develop those new rules because it hasn't been able to make progress in its negotiating function, its rulemaking function. So that's the first huge challenge facing the WTO and the world trading system. The second challenge is that the WTO's dispute settlement process, which allows disputes over whether countries are following the rules to be decided, and has been disabled. And this has happened because the most important, perhaps in many ways the most important part of that process, the appellate body, which is, if you like, the final court of appeal in the dispute settlement process. The dispute settlement process involves a first stage where a panel hears the dispute and makes a decision, and then if it's a controversial issue, the decision will almost always be appealed to the appellate body. So to finally resolve the issue, you have to get a decision from the appellate body, but the appellate body has been shut down since 2019 because the United States refused to confirm the appointments of the judges that were needed to fill all the seats on the appellate body, to fill the vacancies as they occurred. So since 2019, there has been no possibility of getting a final decision on some of the most controversial disputes because the appellate body has been shut down essentially by the United States. And so that means that these new realities in international trade have either not been addressed at all, or at best partially addressed in trade rules. So if we look at the fragmentation of production through production networks and global value chains, We have concerns about connecting issues relating to the connection of production units and doing business abroad, which means the links between trade, investment, and services becomes critically important. And so businesses and governments want trade agreements that are going to address the issues that come out of that. And because we can't get agreement on these, on rules relating to these issues in the WTO, it means that more and more these issues are being addressed in free trade agreements, regional trade agreements, rather than in the WTO rules, which is one of the reasons why free trade agreements have spread so much in recent years. And it's also the case that many of these issues, because we're talking about doing business in different countries, many of the issues involve what we call behind the border issues, what happens within countries, which involves regulations rather than what we would consider to be trade barriers, regulations inside countries that affect the ability of production networks and global value chains to operate. So that means that some of the issues that become much more important now in this world are services, because goods and services are more and more linked together. Traded services are embedded in traded goods. A large part of the value in the goods that are being traded are accounted for by services, and also the services that provide the key linkages between the different parts of the production networks and the global value chains through transport, through telecommunications, through finance. All of these are services which are linking together the different parts of the production networks and the global value chains. So services become even more important in the age of fragmented production. Investment, obviously, because that's how value chains developed, as international investment. Intellectual property protection, because if countries want to invest in different countries, they want to ensure that their intellectual property is going to be protected in each country where they operate. Competition policy, firms investing in countries to spread their, to develop their global value chains want to be sure that their operations are not going to be unfairly disadvantaged by favoritism shown by governments, such as the governments of many Asian countries, not only China, but also Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, may give preferential treatment to their state-owned enterprises, which maybe provide unfair competition for companies setting up their own production units in these countries. Trade facilitation, which we'll talk about in a later session, though not just reducing trade barriers, but also making it easier to move goods across borders, facilitating, smoothing the flow of goods, reducing the time taken to move goods through ports, better logistics. All of these things which increase the efficiency and reduce the cost of international trade become even more important once you are in this global value chain or production network world, moving capital between countries, and of course logistics and infrastructure. Countries and in early days China, but many other countries learnt that if you want to be an attractive host for investment coming, firms wanting to set up their value chains or parts of their value chains in your country, you have to have efficient logistics and efficient infrastructure. And one of the reasons why China has been so successful in establishing itself as a center of production network activity or value chain activity is because they recognized very early the need for efficient logistics and efficient infrastructure. So that's one set of realities that international trade regulation has to deal with. Another one is the digital revolution, which we've already talked about, digital trade and digital economy. That creates a demand for extending intellectual property protection rules to cover digital economy issues. So pressure for stronger intellectual property protection from countries that export intellectual property, particularly the United States. Many concerns come out of this. What about the impact on spreading knowledge or research collaboration? What about internet retransmission of copyright material? What about the fair use exemptions for using copyright material, which of course is very important for institutions like universities, and access to medicines, again, becomes even more important in this case because we were involved, the transactions are now digitally organized. So you have an increased demand for cross-border data flows to allow more efficient exploitation of digital technology, which raises privacy and sovereignty concerns. So all of these issues are demanding more attention in trade rules and trade agreements. Because the WTO its negotiating function has been paralysed, the WTO hasn't really been able to modernise its rules to keep up with these developments, and so they're having to be dealt with through other channels such as regional trade agreements or free trade agreements and common markets and so on. Then the shutdown of the appellate body. This happened when the United States, as we'll see, was engaged in very extensive unilateral trade actions, which many countries and many economists regarded as against WTO rules, or if not against rules, against well understood norms, which would inevitably lead to WTO dispute action. So using national security as the justification for new trade barriers in ways that are not really, arguably, are not allowed in the WTO rules, in other words, weaponizing the national security exceptions by justifying a whole range of new trade barriers as necessary for national security. Using a provision in the United States law called Section 301, which allows the United States to take action against what it deems to be unfair trade practices by partner countries, but which is supposed to be preceded by taking the dispute, first of all, to the WTO's dispute settlement system, but the United States more and more using Section 301 without first going through the WTO dispute settlement process, violating non-discrimination. I probably should have mentioned and highlighted more strongly that one of the key principles is that in the WTO is non-discrimination, that you do not impose higher trade barriers on some countries than on other countries, that all trade barriers should be applied in a non-discriminatory way if they are going to be applied against all countries alike. The United States more and more using trade barriers to target particular countries, China obviously, but also other countries as well, including sometimes their own allies being targeted by these trade barriers. And when other countries retaliate against that, taking disputes against them. So this kind of behaviour by the United States was becoming more common at the time the appellate body was shut down. And what the shutdown then meant was that although this kind of behaviour would inevitably lead to disputes, the panel stage could go ahead, but getting a final ruling, which would almost inevitably be required because the losing party in the dispute would always appeal, simply could not happen. So effectively it meant that there was no constraint on the United States to behave in this way because there was no way of getting a dispute finalised because the appellate body had been shut down. So there was, the other members of the WTO reacted pretty strongly against this by setting up an alternative appeal process. So there is a process set up by the EU, Canada, a number of other WTO members, including, interestingly, China, also Hong Kong, New Zealand, and many others, to provide an appeal process as a stopgap measure until the WTO appellate body could resume. This can be used by any other WTO members at any time, follows WTO rules, but of course it's of no use in disputes against the United States if the United States is not participating in this alternative dispute settlement process. And then we have the trade wars, which developed under President Trump and were continued by President Biden. I'm going to, I might come back to this tomorrow rather than do it now because I think we're going to run out of time. But basically, we had a series of trade wars, first of all, launched by President Trump and involving a number of other countries, including obviously China, but also some of these trade wars involved even allies of the United States, where tariffs were imposed on steel or aluminium production coming from the European Union or from Canada or from Australia and New Zealand. The trade wars became very extensive, involving a lot of trade. And as I said, we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow in more detail. version 1, I've said, was under President Trump, which was really quite crude in the way it operated, as you'd expect, I suppose, from President Trump. But the sort of more sophisticated form of the trade war has developed under President Biden, again, which has focused on protecting American industry under the justification of protecting the American middle class and American workers, under the national security justification of moving production away from countries that are regarded as not friendly towards friendly countries, like moving it back to the United States itself, what we call reshoring or friendshoring instead of offshoring, and more and more using managed trade solutions to trade disputes. So again, sort of making agreements, for example, with China, that China would purchase a particular level of agricultural exports from the United States, which was very bad for other agricultural exporting countries, because China could only fulfill these commitments by reducing its imports from other countries to allow it to fulfill its commitments to the United States, which was not a good outcome for agricultural exports like Australia, New Zealand, and probably many other countries, including in Africa. And the Biden version of the trade war linked the trade wars to what was seen as a sort of a life or death, existential, zero-sum, win or lose struggle between democracy and autocracy. So it meant that trade policy became linked to geopolitics in a much more direct way than had been in the case. And the US also began to revive industrial policy, in other words, subsidizing industries like semiconductors and green industries, which upset its allies in, for example, the European Union, as well as China. And the technological war with China aimed to block China's access to technology which it needed to produce advanced semiconductors. Again, justifying this on the basis of the United States' national security, that they didn't want China to develop technology which might be used militarily against it. So those were the trade wars. And so what you basically had, and I'll conclude very quickly here because we do want to have some breakout discussion. Basically, from the last 5 years, you've had a perfect storm in trade policy. And that's really well when I said that the world trade policy environment is in a mess. It basically arises from this perfect storm, the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that disrupted production chains, disrupted transportation, and disrupted production almost everywhere. The trade wars that I've just talked about, the Ukraine war, which produced huge increase, was devastating, of course, for the Ukraine, but also produced very large increases in the prices of wheat and other grains, and therefore of basic foodstuffs, of fertilizer, of energy, oil and other energy products. So a very significant impact on world trade. And of course, against all that, the increasing pressure for a more effective response to the climate change imperatives. So that perfect storm led to the debate about whether globalization was still a good idea. More and more talk of deglobalizing as a response to the perfect storm, moving away from greater integration, greater reliance on international trade, to countries to become more self-sufficient, which means, of course, more trade barriers. Others, including the experts at the WTO, argued for reglobalization, in other words, reacting to all these things that have happened by bringing us back, to correcting the disruptions and ensuring that supply chains could be reactivated, and that moving back from the perfect storm to restoring the way international trade used to operate before the perfect storm hit it. So you have this deglobalization on the one side being advocated, reglobalization on the other side. And then the final point I just wanted to conclude with is that the WTO researchers, who of course are in favor of reglobalization, calculated the effect of the three. Well, they defined 3 different types of polarity response and calculated the effect of these on economic output or GDP in 3 different categories of countries: developed, developing, and least developing. And so they looked at, first of all, reglobalization, which is a revival of multilateralization to, if you like, repair the damage that had been done by the perfect storm that I've just described. Full rivalry, which is where you would get a complete decoupling between 2 blocks, the Chinese, essentially a Chinese bloc and an American bloc, and all countries being forced to choose one bloc or the other. And then partial rivalry, which is what actually is happening at the moment, is where you have decoupling to some extent going on between the 2 major countries, China and the United States, but developing and least developed countries remain outside the blocks and don't engage in decouplings. In other words, as we're seeing in many parts of the developing world now, developing countries refusing to take sides between the United States and China. So we call that partial rivalry, where the 2 superpowers decouple from each other, or the United States decouples from China at least, but other countries stay outside that and refuse to take one side or the other. And you can see here how this diagram works, the GDP impact. So you can see that, first of all, the first 3 columns, you have the global income impact. Next 3 columns, impact on developed economies, then on next 3 developing economies, and finally least developed countries. And so in each case, you have the effect of reglobalization, first column, second column, partial rivalry, and the third column, full rivalry, when that's repeated for each of the 4 categories of countries. And the results show that in all cases, reglobalization has a positive effect on each category of country. And in the case of least developed countries, even partial rivalry has a positive effect for least developed countries. But, how to do that? But the worst outcome for all countries is full rivalry, which has quite significant negative effects on every category of country, but especially on developing economies and least developed countries, and on the global economy as a whole. And partial rivalry has a negative effect on each of the 3 groups other than least developed countries. So this is the WTO economists saying it'd be much better for the world if we go back to reglobalize rather than keep on going down the deglobalization track. So from the point of view of countries outside the sort of warring countries who have to decide what they do they go on one side or the other? Do they stay outside the conflict? Obviously, it looks like partial rivalry would be staying outside the conflict would be better for most of us, but even better would be the revival of multilateralism, and that means reglobalization. So I will stop there, and we'll go on to what I think will have to be a fairly brief breakout session. Suzanne, have we got the questions there? Can we put these up on the screen?
I can do that. I will.
If you can perhaps explain how the breakout sessions work, and I'll give a brief explanation about the questions.
Okay, I will just put the questions up so that you can explain them, and then I'll get back to the. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see those. So, yes, Rob can talk to these questions in a second. We will go into breakout rooms. I'm going to randomly assign you as best I can to make sure that you are with people from different countries so that you can start what we call in Aotearoa New Zealand whakawhanaungatanga, which is building relationships and starting to get to know each other a bit more. So hopefully you'll get to meet some new people. And I think we will probably only be able to do it for 10 minutes. So I suspect you're going to have to choose one of these questions. The rest we can put, either we can
Okay, so shall I continue now, Suzanne?
one you can pull back for your group, make a note of which room you are in.
Yeah, okay, so just to
Are
briefly
there,
explain,
yeah, go for it, Rob.
briefly explain these questions. I wasn't sure what the background of the class or the class was going to be, whether people would be trade officials or business people or NGO representatives. So some of the questions might be something that would be suitable for people who have trade policy or trade trade official experience. So maybe have experience of dealing with the WTO. Others maybe for people who are involved in international trade themselves, be much more wanting to talk about exports and imports of your country and your trade partnerships and what trade barriers you face in other countries. So I would suggest that depending on your background and what you're most interested in each group, if you choose to pick one of these questions and decide to talk about that and then report back to us.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to open the room. So you should see an invitation on your screen to join the breakout room. If you're having any issues, you can always press the call for help button and one of us will come and help you. And I will share these questions to the breakout room as well. So you'll be able to see them while you're in there.
Okay.
So we've only got 10 minutes. So, and I am sorry, there was a little bit of a brief. We'll have much more time for conversation tomorrow. Obviously we're all still getting to know each other and finding our feet today. Basically we're only going to have about 60 seconds each to report back, but we will continue these conversations. So room 1, did you have a spokesperson? Christian, Maxwell, Tesha, seeing who's in that group.
Yes, we have selected Tesha.
Christian.
Representative. Yes.
Yes, of course.
Oh, Tesha. Well done.
Of course, we managed to go through the question number 1. We didn't manage to go all of them because the session was so short. But in case number 1, what were the recent development, if any, WTO has been the most important for our country, and they have this development has been positive or negative. For our case, it's true. It has been very positive since it has reduced the trade barriers and enhanced the regional trade competitiveness and open markets for the global supply. So at this point, the WTO it's purely in line of what we are doing at regional level, because we have what is EAC, East African Community, of which also promote trade in the SADC. So the application of the WTO has helped us to enhance the efforts of the regional blocks in enhancing the trade within the countries. So the barriers in the borders and the customs have been reduced. So in fact, it has been positively impacted to the trading issues within the region. We didn't discuss that much on the second question and the fourth, but the session kept us what we did. Thank you.
That's great, Tesha. Thank you. Yeah, I'm hoping we can come back to these questions tomorrow. Rob?
Fantastic. I mean, basically what you're saying is that for your countries, the WTO system is working exactly as it should. It's despite everything that's going on in the world today is quite encouraging.
Excellent. Yes. Room 2, Mohammed, Silvano, Sarah, Eunice. Did you have a spokesperson?
Yes, we.
Excellent.
we had like a breakout, but we do not have like luxury of time with us. And because of some lag in network, some people also are unable to participate. But we're just able to choose like question 5, like what are the main trade barriers in our country and the challenges we are facing, but we didn't really discuss much on it because of the short time. But individual like wrote out some things, personal stuff to talk on. So that's what happened in room 2.
Because I'm sorry that we didn't have more time, but as I say, we will revisit some of these questions around sort of barriers and you know, your priorities around imports and exports and the plurilateral initiatives. Room 3, Refilwe, Shadrach.
I think Shireen just had a post on the chat. But she said her battery's running out.
Oh dear. Okay. All right, Shireen, well, we'll see you tomorrow. So okay. In room 4, was there anyone from Gray, Martin?
Room 4. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Good morning. Hi. Yeah, it's Mulema Melvin, and I'll be reporting for room 4. Room 4, we choose what are the main trade barriers that export face in other countries. And the first point we had was infrastructure. And we are looking at the logistic aspect, where you find like right now in the SFTA, we have a lot of problem taking our, like for Kenya, taking our products to, let's say, Ghana. It's simple for products to go to China or Dubai. It takes less time, but it's tedious for Kenya to maybe West Africa. The second point still on logistics, even in the air transport, is still a problem. The second point was the custom clearance. We have long custom clearance in Africa and also a lot of paperwork involved, and which make it lose a lot of time. The third point was the forex, the dollar exchange. We are depending too much on dollar when we are exchanging, and we end up losing a lot of money through the exchange. And the last was the SPS issue. The SPS issue, we are getting it when you are exporting like something like our avocados to China. It has a lot of SPS issue. It needs us to freeze the avocados, which give it an extra cost. Maybe somebody from the group can add other points. I submit.
No, I think that's really interesting that, you know, those kind of additional costs and potentially thinking about ways that you could mitigate some of those costs.
I think we'll definitely be talking much more about trade facilitation, which I think is one of the things you're talking about, and also things like SPS and TBT barriers. We'll talk about that in more detail in a later session. So it's good to know that's important.
Kumbukani, you were going to maybe speak for group 3? I see you had your hand up.
So group 3, I think that was me, Shireen, Abdul, and Referral. And maybe just quickly, and in addition to what others have already shared, we also took the last question, looking at trade barriers in our respective countries. And one challenge that came up top was the different quality standard requirements that different countries have, which make it difficult for other countries, to export their products to those countries. So I'll give you an example of, for example, let's say if you are to export groundnuts, the Indian market will require, let's say 30 parts per billion of aflatoxin levels. But then the South African market will look at 10 parts per billion of aflatoxin. And then we have the European market, which will look at 4 parts per billion. So, which is like very, very difficult to penetrate that kind of a market. And added to that is the issue of customs and administrative procedures. Sometimes they take longer than necessary. and they will just make the whole process difficult. And one challenge also that is very unique for my country, Malawi, is the lack of market information. So you have to get to know which country needs what produce in what quantity and at what time and in what kind of phases and roads. So it becomes very difficult to tap into such markets.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we will certainly be addressing some of those issues later in the course. So it's helpful to know how important those are for you and for no doubt other countries as well.
Okay, I am aware of the time, and in fact, actually, we've done pretty well, Rob. We're sort of fairly bang on. Hopefully, we will have lots more time tomorrow to talk through some of these things some more. Thank you, Rob, for your presentation, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. Thank you to all of the scholars for sharing your experience and interests with us. I will close with a karakia, which, as Jen mentioned, is a short sort of kind of spiritual incantation just to close the session and send us on our way. Kia tau, kia tato katoa, te ao, te aroha me te marito, tihe mauri ora. And that just means may peace, love, and safety be upon us all. Go well, and Rob and I will see you back here tomorrow. Have a lovely day.
Right, good day. Bye.
Good day to you.
Good day. Kia ora. Okay.